that new media company covering everything. I'm talking that news you ain't heard of, cause you know it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Fucking politics that the corporate news won't cover. You know they don't think that you could see it under, but you can now, cause the people we cover, they may not be famous, but their stories should be heard. Yeah, every voice matters, we should rise and fall together, and that's why.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday, June 3rd. And the reason I know it's June 3rd is because we had a mini Super Tuesday election yesterday. How many people were paying attention to the election? 14. Yes, Andy, that is the right answer. 14 people were paying attention to the primary election yesterday. So let's start there. I pulled up the results. I didn't go down to congressional races, and we interviewed one of the candidates out of Indiana, the 5th district, Jennifer Christie, who was a phenomenal candidate. Would have been a great choice, but the people of Carmel, Indiana, the more affluent area, she was running against a state rep, a corporate Dem who I guess is a Democrat. So that, yeah, that particular candidate won the race and will be going into the general election. So way to go, Indiana. Andy, before I get started on the election results, how are you doing this morning?
I'm actually a little bit run down this morning. I'm a little tired. I gave a pint of blood yesterday, so I'm down in paint. And I'm just asking the musical question: how do people in Indiana vote with their hands up their ass?
I don't know. Unengaged, uninformed, and voting against our own interests. So there's. How does it always happen? Always. So.
We can blame whoever we want, but today I'll blame the coronavirus, I guess. I don't know. I'm reaching now. It's the best I can do in short notice. Sorry about that.
Well, I think part of it is we had low voter turnout anyway, and I think Donald Trump said it. The more that people vote, the less Republicans win. So we want to keep everybody's attention and ability away from elections. We want to make it really difficult, and we want people to tune out. So there you go. So for people who are engaged in the protest, thank you for your civic engagement there. Could you also maybe vote? Right? So there was this wonderful woman in New York who went on this rant about there were some people kind of wilding out in her neighborhood, and it's a predominantly working class neighborhood. And she made the point that, and I didn't catch her name, otherwise I would give her a shout out right now, but she made the point to them that, why are you tearing up my neighborhood? These are people who work for a living. You're obviously just out here taking advantage of things. And it was just like a couple boys she was talking to. She's like, it's not just the people who live here, but she said the people who rely on social services, the homeless, all of these other things. And then she made the case that elections matter. And she's right, because when we look at the district attorneys who are not prosecuting corrupt police officers for blatantly violating the law, you elect a district attorney. And typically it's done during a primary. You choose your candidate, and then going into the general, that's either the person has nobody against them, or you've made your decision there. So this is why primary elections matter. So shout out to whomever that wonderfully eloquent lady was in New York, who there's a post going around about it, but she's absolutely right. You cannot go out and pursue your First Amendment rights if you're not also going to engage in the electoral process. And I'm certainly not going to vote shame anybody. If there's a candidate that there is no candidate for you in a particular race, skip it. It's called an undervote. Go to the next one. Go to your judges, go to your DAs, go to all of your local council people, your city council. Los Angeles live streamed their city council meeting, and boy, did they get torn a new ass. Everybody that called in was furious, in particular because the police chief resigned, got a couple $1 million in a golden parachute, and then came back to work, but didn't have to give that money back.
That's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, that's a hell of a bonus. So, to all of those people who called in, are you voting? Are you paying attention? I applaud you for being engaged in your local meetings, because most of them are online now. So even people who are homebound can at least participate in that way. But this is where it all begins, is at this local level. So these are things to pay attention to. And in my own case, I have a local state's attorney in our county. If it's anything to do with politics in any way, shape, or form, he won't touch it. So my goal is to make sure that this particular gentleman gets replaced, and he can take his little do-nothing ass and go back to the private sector.
And go to Florida, where they, do nothing is an actual job.
That's exactly right. He would be well served in Florida. Get the hell out. So some of the election results from last night, looking at the delegate count, because on Monday we were doing the Super Tuesday Eve, and I was trying to explain to people, because I have even some of my own friends were really harsh, saying, give it up, the election's over, we got Joe Biden. Well, first, that's not how elections work. Second, we talked about the DNC members like David McDonald out of Washington State, who are trying right now to repeal the superdelegate reform that was so hard fought. So in order to stop that, or at least get one progressive on the rules and bylaws in the convention committee, the presidential candidates need to earn a minimum number. So this is why the primary still matters. We still have an election going on. So as of Monday, Bernie Sanders was about 200 delegates shy of getting the right to put somebody on one of these committees. So this is what I was checking this evening. And of course, in states where Bernie did meet the 15% threshold to earn a delegate, they're really slow at awarding those numbers. So of course there's still some totals coming out. But for example, District of Columbia, Bernie Sanders was at 10%. He gets no delegates. Elizabeth Warren was at 12. She gets no delegates. Joe Biden was at 77. He's probably going to get all the delegates. Indiana, Joe Biden was at 76%. Bernie Sanders is at 13.9, 78% reporting. So he may meet the 15% threshold to get one delegate. We'll see. So even Pete Buttigieg got 3% there. Maryland, 85% to Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders, 6%. He will get no delegates at all. And that is still at 56% reporting, but the chances, all of those votes would have to come in for Bernie Sanders, and they may. Maybe that's why they're not counting those. So we'll keep an eye on that. Montana is where it's starting to look good. Montana, 79% reporting. Bernie Sanders has 14.4, so it is likely that he will earn a delegate in Montana. Maybe two. New Mexico, this one was even better. New Mexico, Bernie is already at 15% with 86% reporting. So he will get delegates there. There are 34 delegates up for grabs. Right now, Biden has been awarded 25. So still haven't given any to Bernie, even though he is eligible. Pennsylvania, 71% reporting. Joe Biden got 77% of the vote. Bernie Sanders got 19. So Bernie has already been awarded 2 delegates, and there are more. Pennsylvania had 186 delegates available. That was a huge state. Huge state. Who was doing the voter outreach in Pennsylvania? Just because the Sanders campaign has been suspended, we had Our Revolution and a bunch of progressive groups. Who was doing the outreach out there? So this is why elections matter. Rhode Island, 94% reporting. Joe Biden got 62% of the vote. Bernie Sanders got 29% of the vote, but he's still showing with 0 delegates. That's not accurate. He's going to get some delegates out of Rhode Island, who had a total of 26 delegates available. And then South Dakota. South Dakota, y'all doing it. 94% reporting, and Bernie Sanders got 23.5%. He's already been awarded 3 delegates. There are still more delegates up for grabs. So the estimation right now is that the Bernie Sanders campaign is about 150 delegates shy of being able to have the authority and the right to put somebody on one of these committees. And Don Ford talked about it. Even if it's just one person who could at least make the rest of us aware of what's going on and provide a voice to all of the progressives still fighting within the Democratic Party for acknowledgement. You know, it's funny, in the big tent, a conservative, even a fascist, gets a voice, but a progressive Democrat does not. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Apparently they have different gun laws too.
Well, there's that. It's kind of I question it on many, many levels, and I don't want to offend people who are still Dementor. Completely your choice. But you've got to recognize that the deck is stacked against you, so you're going to have to try harder. You cannot just rely on people to know that there's an election or on social media. You're going to have to start making phone calls because we have all of these down ballot candidates too who need help. And your post on social media ain't doing it. You got to pick up the phone. You got to dedicate just 1 hour a week. Just 1 hour can make a difference in pulling a few votes. And in a primary election where people are tuned out because we got, chaos, that can make all the difference. So, yeah, go ahead and say what you're going to say on social media, but unless you're actively volunteering, and all of these candidates have phone banking. You can just pick up the phone, sign up, and start making calls and get out the vote. So really, I'm not trying to hear any excuses on this.
Right, and phone banking is so important, right? Because the face-to-face communication that a lot of the candidates rely on, going door to door, has been kiboshed because of the pandemic. So that makes phone banking so much more important. Right? It's huge.
Huge, absolutely.
It's huge.
Yeah, so that's kind of the election recap, and I'm sure Don will have far more to say on that one. So yeah, anything you want to talk about before I start to get into my social media rant?
I can't even remember my name, so go ahead.
Andy's been working overtime trying to catch up. That's funny. We'll try to get through this as quick as we can. Okay, so thinking in terms of prior shows that we've done about critical thinking, which we obviously don't have enough of. We're going to apply those lessons to today, as well as some of the prior discussions we had on propaganda. So what is propaganda? Propaganda is I am going to create a narrative that may or may not be accurate. The best is if there's a little tiny bit of truth in it, and then the rest of it I deflect to the reality I want to create. So we're seeing a whole lot of that on social media with regard to the protests. So first, let's be clear. In this country, you have a right to peacefully protest. Absolutely.
What
So
country are you in again?
I forget. I believe it's the United States. At least it was a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure what it is today.
It's I understand that USAF is being changed to United States and fascists.
It kind of feels that way. So that's so here is my big frustration, right? We have Second Amendment people who exclusively focus on the Second Amendment. I'm personally a big supporter of Second Amendment, but I'm also a supporter of all of our amendments. It's the weirdest place to be because I've actually read the Constitution and I've read the Bill of Rights, and in our house that's an annual tradition because something about people like when you try to recall something that you read, the mind will help you and build little mental bridges and change what is actually there, just to help you get over that hurdle. So what happens is if you don't revisit reading these things, whether it's your holy book or Constitution, things that you say you believe in your mind it changes the wording and most times to fit your current argument. So it's important that people know how to, number one, find the unadulterated copy of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and read them. So in the First Amendment,
Novel concept.
yeah, right, right. So this is the law of the land. The in federal law, a Constitution supersedes state and local. That has been a Supreme Court ruling. That has been the way we've done things. States have rights, but federal law supersedes. So you have a right to protest, to peaceably assemble. So if you are trying to avoid people peacefully assembling, one of the things that you would do is introduce elements that are provocateurs. So we've seen this with the Oakland Police Department a couple years ago where they interjected undercover officers who started wilding out during a protest, and that was used as an excuse to arrest all the protesters. So it's a pattern of behavior that we see over and over again. And that's not to say that there aren't some complete morons who do engage in this behavior. So day one of the Minneapolis protest, we saw that. And we also saw the video of these four individuals, these young boys, who were checked really quickly by the other peaceful protesters who were there. They started doing their shit and everybody checked them and said, no, we're not about that. We're here to peacefully protest. And then more video footage came out of some of these people with their face covered. The one gentleman who has been outed as a police officer from St. Paul. And I know what the police department said. I know their statement. Same guy was implicated years ago in a undercover, unofficial, unauthorized drive-by. So even his ex-wife went, yeah, that's my husband, active duty police officer. So
This is the guy codenamed Thor.
yes, with the hammer. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's him. So these are some of the things I wanted to talk about because some interesting developments have come down relative to Washington statements, activities online, and harassment of American citizens exercising their rights. And in some cases, they're being irrevocably harmed. through physical violence. They're being arrested. And we're just seeing a complete suspension of the Constitution without actually declaring martial law, which is an important distinction. So no one has suspended our rights. However, in practice, that is what's happening. So one of the things that I picked up was, this one's an easy one, the BRICS, Twitter BRICS. So I'm going to put this one up. So this one, I've seen this from the left and the right. It's a Twitter message about Antifa, which for those who are not aware, Antifa means anti-fascist. So of this group, these are some of the ones who went out to challenge fascists and white supremacists holding their rallies. And this is why they were getting a bad rap, because within the Antifa movement, it's a movement, not an organization, there are people who are committed to physical action, some who are there just for protest, some who are there for support. So what was happening is we were having a bunch of white supremacists going unchecked, and this group of people, it's this nebulous non-organization, decided, okay, no, we're not going to allow fascists to go unchecked on American soil. And that's where the rise came from. So of this group, you do have some people who are anarchists, and they go along the political spectrum, but their goal number one is to challenge fascism. So what we had now from President Trump and a bunch of people on the right was assigning all of these random brick piles to the Antifa movement, that the assumption was being made that, and here you can see Bill Gates, Berkshire Hathaway, all of these left icons, or whatever you want to call them, and J.B. Pritzker, who's my governor. So of course they pick out California, Illinois, you know, all the governors that are in the blue states, and then Dallas, to say that we had purchased bricks for the protesters for the purpose of looting. And none of that is true. None of it is true. And then even on the left, we had video footage of police officers unloading bricks. And the police department at Boston University said, yeah, the police officers put the bricks in the back of their car because there was a broken sidewalk, so they were collecting them.
Yeah, because they're doubling as construction workers right
now. Right. Okay, so you took it the same way I did. I was like, so they're masonry experts? Okay, so...
Well, think of the tough times that actual bricklayers are going through, not being able to get product because of being bought up by the police department. Apparently, I understand that there was a lot of money wasted in this purchase because they had each brick engraved with property of Antifa.
Well, that would be hugely expensive, but actually something that would be valuable on eBay. So, yeah, so the whole brick thing is going back and forth, and there's a real easy way around this. So we have something called a FOIA, Freedom of Information. Your local civic organization, whether it's city council or whatever, you can file a FOIA to request any and all information on masonry, bricks, construction equipment purchased by that organization or your police department in your city. So it takes like 30 seconds to file a FOIA. So ask if they made any purchases for last year, and then there you go. So so that's one way around it.
If you're a sheet metal worker, does that mean that you have to apply for a tin FOIA?
Yeah. I guess technically.
That's only if you want a hat.
Right. So Yeah, I guess tinfoil is sheet metal, isn't it? So
It's thin.
it's just thin and portable. So one of the other things was, okay, so let's talk about Antifa. And we'll bring this one up. So I thought this was interesting. And this is where I am always so grateful that criminals are never really smart. So some white supremacist group, Europa something or other, and yeah, so they've been around for a while. These were some of the guys that were in South Carolina. You will not replace us. Yes, we can.
Apparently, before you begin, I just wanted to clarify that name. Europa isn't so much a play on the continent. It's at the beginning part of the sentence. Europa is in the back of my truck.
Yes, yes, yeah. So there's some hardcore white supremacists, incel crybabies. So we saw this after South Carolina, where some of those organizers were really big, bad, and tough, and then ended up on social media crying. So let's remember that these are people who will walk around with weapons, most of whom have never been fired upon, most of whom have never seen combat. And they themselves think that they're, just, it is overcompensation for their own sadness and inadequacy, that they have to put themselves above someone else. So here's what they did. They decided, because they're complete morons, that they were going to have a Twitter hashtag Antifa_US. And then they were going to put out these tweets inciting violence and encouraging violence. But here's what made me laugh about it. If you read what they wrote, you can tell right away that this is written by a complete idiot white supremacist who thinks that the left speaks this way. So the tweet was, and I've got it up here, "Tonight's the night, comrades. Tonight we say F the city and we move into residential areas, the white hoods, and we take what's ours." I'm like, that is like the worst contrived dialogue. I can't imagine somebody writing a movie or a script with that in that not getting fired on the spot, because it's horrifically ridiculous. The other thing that we want to point out here is, look at the dog whistles that they put in here. This is amazing. They said, we're going to move into residential areas, the white hoods, and take what's ours. So Antifa is primarily white, but yet they're using the call-out dog whistles that I talked about. Andy, you were still on convalescing when I was talking about this, but it was going back to the Vietnam War era and the CIA counter-ops propaganda effort, where they were taking these words and phrases that people were extraordinarily sensitive to, especially our older boomer generation who grew up during the Red Scare. So there was this entire narrative about creating the idea that a black person is a thug, that a black person is a criminal, a black person is scary, and a black person just wants everything that the white people want. So rather than treating them as people, it was this narrative to divide our citizenry along culture and racial lines. And that has been actually a narrative that has started from the beginning of our country. So I highly recommend reading A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. It is available online for free. And you can see where in Virginia, the poor people of the New World, the whites and blacks, and even indigenous people got along really well. So well that they were marrying each other and trading with each other, and that freaked out the oligarchy completely because they were outnumbered. So this is where we start to see the first segregation laws and the first anti-interracial marriage laws. So that continues now to this day, where you have these racist white supremacists, the way they think, and you can see them in this contrived post try to model and pretend to be Antifa. So how anybody fell for this is just beyond me, but some people did. And of course you had the White House picking up on this narrative in order to condemn a peaceful protest. So one of the things that I was very happy to see is corporate media is starting to get hip to this and talk about it. And one of my own favorites that I grew up with, Voice of America Radio. They, Voice of America Radio is run out of the State Department, so shout out to the 4 people left at the State Department. You guys are still doing good work. So here is the article that they published. This is the Voice of America. 4 extremist groups suspected of involvement in protest violence. So I'm gonna post the link to this particular article because I think they do a lovely job of really parsing together who's doing what, because this is not a mystery. Oh, shout out to the Facebook user who said, you can just glue the bricks together and render them useless. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. So here's the article that I'm looking at right now. It's pretty long, so I didn't want to post the whole thing. But what I found was just reassuring was, number one, it's really good reporting. 2, they got it all. So for those who cannot get to the article right now, here are the 3 groups that they called out based on federal and local investigations and the arrest warrants that are going out. So number 1, white supremacist groups. So we saw this in Minneapolis. We saw people photographing some of these white supremacists who were pretending to be protesters and were actually doing some of the looting and destruction. So those people are being arrested. I think there are nationwide almost 400 arrests now. So it's not just Minneapolis that it's happening. It's over and over and over in a sort of coordinated effort for some of these white supremacist groups to operate as what they call accelerators. They push the violence faster than would normally occur in a bunch of angry people. So they are there to help stoke that anger and create that narrative of the protesters are just thugs. They're thugs, when we're not having the right conversation about, well, maybe people shouldn't die because of our police officers, right? So then the second group, and this is a new one for me, I'm gonna have to do some reading on this, the Boogaloo Boys. Boogaloo meaning these are folks who are complete morons who are literally trying to start a new civil war. So the Boogaloo means the second Boogaloo. That's their word for civil war. So apparently these guys have never studied history, believe that people on the left don't also own guns and don't also know how to shoot. They think that they're just going to march over this country and create a new world order. So if you want to know what that would look like, think of a theocracy, and there's actually a show out, Handmaid's Tale. It gives you a pretty good idea of what these folks are after. And then, of course, the last group, Antifa. So Antifa, some of those members are actually doing some illegal things and getting into violence and property destruction. So these are the 3 groups. But the only one that's getting called out here is Antifa, not the very fine people in the white supremacy and the people who are openly trying to incite civil war. So that's fun.
I think it's all based on the number of red hats purchased. I think that they have a database that they're going by.
I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised. So one of the things that I keep getting, people would send me information on law enforcement attempting to do the tracing. So you have the contact tracing with COVID, and then these people who are getting arrested, they're going through their cell phones. Who did you call? Who did you be in contact with? And people are like, that's about, I'm like, well, here's a dirty little secret about marketing. I have been able to purchase that particular ability for years in marketing. We call it in marketing fencing. So what would happen is if you went to a convention or some location, a building, a meeting, whatever, I could purchase a virtual fence of up to 20 feet around that facility. And this company would take your cell phone data, whether you wanted to or not, and I could send you targeted ads within that fencing location. So if you were going to like a Comic-Con convention, I can still buy this today. Everybody who enters within that fencing zone would then get my my ad. So it's the same principle, but this whole idea that your cell phone and your network and everything else, are y'all not reading your terms of service? 'Cause
Yes, and you know what? Turning off your phone doesn't help.
no. At a local level, your local police, if you turn off your phone, they can't ping you. But when you start to get up into the, no, turning it off doesn't work. So, so I hate to be the bearer of bad news there, but yeah, that has been a capitalist asset that any marketing company could buy. So if I have access to it, who else has access to it, right? So any expectation that you have of privacy, please just no. Someone on Facebook is asking, what is Antifa again? Not calling out white supremacists and Antifa is enlightened centrism. Okay, so Antifa is short for anti-fascists. So we have the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis or Nazi members, these Boogaloo boys who are fascists, okay? Anti-fascists are the ones who have pledged to stand up to them. So I'm not advocating for violence, but I'm totally okay with punching a Nazi in the face. Absolutely. And part of that comes from my upbringing, that I had both my grandfather and my grandmother, who was a nurse in World War II. Both of them enlisted and fought against fascism. And there was a time in this country where we were all anti-fa or anti-fascist. And we went to war in other parts of the world to stop fascism. And here in this country, if you didn't go to war, you were fighting at home through victory gardens, through not moving about without purpose. Like, you weren't wasting gasoline and your headlights were dimmed on your car. You drove slower. You didn't overconsume. You were taking more walks and riding bikes because the rubber had to go for the war effort and metal had to go for the war effort, and you were working in the factories because we were all anti-fa. So to say that my support of someone who is willing to stand up toe-to-toe with a fascist, waving an assault weapon around in a place like Chicago where we don't have open carry, if there is someone willing to challenge that person, they have my full support. Absolutely.
Yes.
Because we should all be doing that. Now, when you have an anti-fa person who is engaging in looting, that person is a criminal. If you have a Second Amendment person who is engaged in looting, that person is a criminal. Do we understand the difference? Okay? So it's not enlightened centrism. It is the heritage of our country to fight fascism, and anyone who's making excuses for fascist ideology, white supremacy, you're a shitty person. There's no other way to say it. You're a shitty person. And if the only amendment in this country that you are defending is the Second Amendment, you don't deserve it. They are all in there equally. Not one is more important than the other. Okay, so for those of you who are Second Amendment advocates who say Second Amendment defends all the others, where are you? So we have due process and we have equal protection that are so important, they're listed twice in the amendments. Twice. They're the only ones listed twice. Where are you? So if that is in your definition, enlightened centrism, then I would suggest, number one, you need to go back and read the Constitution. You need to go back and read about World War II. And if you're one of those people who is a Holocaust denier, then I would suggest you need counseling. And there are plenty of other books, like I used to live in Hong Kong, and on the side of the mountain in Hong Kong itself is just an island, a 12-mile island, and then Kowloon side was mainland side.
Recently had the entire island carpeted. It cost $850.
Probably. It's not very big, so all the buildings go up. But on the side of the hill, in this super prime real estate, is a cemetery from World War II. And this is from the Japanese occupation of the island. They still have the cast iron cannons posted around the harbor trying to defend it. Well, Japanese came in and murdered so many people during that war effort. So if you cannot bring yourself to accept that the Holocaust in Europe was real, I would invite you to read about the Pacific Theater and what was going on there. And we were fighting fascism there. We fought fascism in Italy and in Northern Africa. And you can read about Rommel and all the activity that was going on there and what fascism truly was. I would suggest strongly that you maybe educate yourself just a little bit, maybe take a few minutes to read about that. If you need some more help, we can post some resources here to help you, but Google is still free where you live. I would suggest maybe you take advantage of that. Okay? So any other comments, feel free to post them. Oh, Andy, they said they can't hear you very well. Is that because you're sleepy?
Maybe. Let me put the microphone in my mouth.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I'll move it closer. I like to keep my microphone hidden, because I don't want to show off.
With your super duper microphone. Yeah, I got it.
Right. My 30-year-old smells like a beer stage mic.
Excellent. We are all jealous of that one. So.
Yes, absolutely. So now, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we talk about Antifa, I always just assumed that if Antifa was an ideology as opposed to a group, right? Like, I mean, if you're anti-fascist, that's just a way of thinking, right? So anybody who can be labeled Antifa. Right?
That's
it's
true.
not necessarily an organized group, which is the dangerous part that we talk about with Trump, labeling Antifa as a terrorist organization. Because then if you're saying that, then anybody that proclaims to be anti-fascist can then, arbitrarily be called part of that organization, quote unquote, and then you can be a terrorist and then you lose all your civil rights.
That's exactly right. And that is the danger that I think people who don't understand what the Constitution says and why it was written, it is extraordinarily dangerous to just arbitrarily label people as terrorists. So what I took a little hope in was they had to explain to Trump that he could not get them labeled as a terrorist organization. So I think the threat of the label is off the table, but what they were going to do with that label is not. So for example, at any point today, somebody could come in and arrest me for espousing anti-fascist views, and I would lose my rights.
Mm.
So if it could happen to anybody, and this is what people are celebrating, and that to me is part of the most egregious horror in all of this. That some of my neighbors and fellow countrymen are openly welcoming this and encouraging it.
Like some certain left-leaning politicians that we know, like Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, Matt Gaetz, Tom Cotton, all of these people they are showing their true colors, right? So they have been able to hide behind a flag and
That was a good one.
Yeah.
Showing the true colors.
Yeah. So they've been talking about, well, I have this pocket constitution. Well, could you read that pocket constitution that you got? Read it.
Yeah.
It is not. So one of the things that came.
It's the difference. What's the difference between the Constitution and the Bible? You're allowed to cherry pick passages from the Bible, not the Constitution.
Right, and the thing about the Constitution is one builds on the next. So if you take out due process, then your Second Amendment rights are null and void, because I can prosecute you, I can shoot you, and you never get a day in court, and you never get your justice. You can't seek justice. So if the people who are talking about those protesters shouldn't be there, and I think the most egregious one is, well, they're violating curfew. Are you kidding me?
It's kind of like truancy officers walking around the street shooting kids.
Yeah, exactly. So in New York last night, Bill de Blasio, what were you thinking? So you had people stuck on the bridge from Brooklyn into Manhattan. They decided they didn't want any more people going into Manhattan. So they shut down the bridge on that side, and then they shut down the bridge on the other side. So there were thousands of people stuck on the bridge, and the police officers would not allow them to go back to Brooklyn. So they were being detained. And I still don't see this morning what the cause was. Like, if an officer is detaining you, he has to tell you why. Right? So if you started walking down the bridge before curfew, and then they detain you, and curfew, which, hi, people, that's martial law, right? So it is going right up to it. So either they're going to declare martial law and the Constitution is void, or they're not and the Constitution's still in place. So you have now got a case where thousands of people have been entrapped by police in New York, and that's illegal. You can't do that. Well, you can do it, but it's illegal. So we saw that. And then the other interesting one, Alexandria, Virginia. So we saw the military fire upon unarmed citizens exercising their constitutionally protected right. They were in front of the White House, peacefully assembled, as they are allowed to do. And the military from Alexandria, Virginia, was there to fire upon them. So we are gassing our own citizens, which, by the way, here's a fun fact. Andy, how many international agreements do we have that allow use of chemical weapons in warfare?
Rough estimate, I would say a lot.
The answer is zero.
That was a
Zero.
good setup, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a good setup. So the answer is zero. In military terms, in a conflict between countries, it is illegal by our own treaties to use chemical weapons on anybody. You can't do
Well,
it.
that is strictly enforced by the United States.
Yes, we've gone into Syria under that pretense. However, you can use chemical weapons on your own people. Even though we use that as an excuse to go after Saddam and other people in Syria, you can do it. And the reason why we allow it as an international community is because law enforcement said, well, if you don't allow us to use chemical weapons against our own people, we're going to have to go with lethal force first.
Well, if they can't use them internationally and they can't use them domestically, they're just going to expire, and then they have to throw them out.
Right. And so what's the good of, all of these chemicals if you can't use them on their own people? So here's Virginia, though. So Virginia had their military in D.C. and cleared out Lafayette Park and fired upon St. John's Church, shot at nurses and priests who were helping with triage so that President Trump could take a photo. I don't know why they don't have Photoshop experts in the White House. Could you not have done that?
I
So
think they wanted to be authentic, and you notice that the video that they took of that wasn't very long, right? they had to cut it off just before the Bible caught fire.
Oh, I don't doubt it. So he's holding up a book he's never read. Number one, which is great. So here's what happened in Virginia. So
Oh, the Bible. Okay.
Yeah, the Bible. So in Virginia, now they also had military helicopters. And this is so funny because I had to explain this to my husband. They had military helicopters low, very low, which is dangerous for the pilot and for the people. So trying to intimidate protesters. And so my husband, who works around this kind of equipment all the time, he's like, what's the problem? I'm like, no. You're a civilian and there's a giant helicopter hovering just not but a couple meters above you. The noise, the size, all of that is meant to stoke fear and terror. That is terrorism. So we're gassing our own people. We're engaging in acts of terrorism. And oh, by the way, on the bridge, I still have to check. They were going to do the boom sound cannons, which do cause hearing loss. So in all of these cases, we have decisions being made to hurt our own citizenry. But in Virginia, you had the helicopters and this egregious use of our military force. They took the dignity and honor away from our own service personnel to fire upon unarmed citizens for a photo op. So Virginia City Council said, we didn't authorize that. That is not a use of our force. In fact, we never even gave you permission. And District of Columbia, the mayor said, well, we never asked for it. And the only way that you can... Well, here's the thing. The only way that you can send actual military forces to another area, to a state in this reciprocity thing, is if it is requested. So if DC didn't ask for it and Virginia didn't authorize it, somebody's lying, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. How did they get there? Did they just co-organize and borrow a couple of helicopters? There's a problem here. There's a complete disconnect. And when you have protesters out there because police aren't being held accountable, now we have Alexandria and DC. Which of you is lying? And what kind of accountability can we expect when we find out who did what?
Apparently, the White House also declared the attack successful, within acceptable losses.
Yeah, maybe. So these are all the things that I think people need to pay attention to. If nothing else, I will say Trump kept his promise because he had pledged to tear down institutions, and I think we have libraries left.
Isn't that what he hired the white supremacists to do?
Oh yeah.
I'm confused now. Oh, no.
Yep. So yeah, we had mercenaries. There's this really lovely picture of mercenaries standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. I'm going to take that and put it next to my photo of Tiananmen Square from when I was in high school. The two look very similar to me.
Mm.
So
The
yeah.
motif is very similar as well.
Yeah. So.
And the color schemes, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's all kind of, the whole thing is surreal, and you can't blame people for being confused because there's such a flood of information coming out, right? And if you're on the left, you're leery of any police report or any, mainstream media report because you've grown to learn to not to trust them, right? So that's just the way it is. We're locked in our houses because of the pandemic, right? That's enough to drive anybody insane. But now we've got to try to process a country on fire that, for the most part, is being orchestrated by the people that are doing the oppressing. Right? We have a police force that now, I don't remember how many different forces use this as a motto, but to serve and protect. As far as I understood, that wasn't just other policemen and politicians. I thought that was everybody.
Well, it's actually property, Andy. Property.
Property, right?
So, but I don't want to end on this negative, even though it can look pretty bleak. And I'm not gonna lie, yesterday I kind of cracked a little bit and needed to unplug and pull away. But what we're seeing now is police officers who are going against their commanders and posting messages of hope. These are police officers doing what we have been asking and begging for, that we need you to be with us. We need you to be with your neighbors, and we need you to be confident and know that we're behind you should you call out one of your fellow colleagues who is breaking the law. We know that we were warned by the FBI years ago that white supremacists were entering into our police force and our national security forces at alarming rates, and that these organizations were planning to extol their ideology in the practice and execution of their jobs. So right now we're seeing, there was this really nice post on Twitter, a gentleman who took off all of his SWAT gear, his sheriff's uniform, and just dumped it. He said in his living room, he said, I was so disgusted to be ordered to fire upon Americans exercising their rights. He said, I quit. And the outpouring that this gentleman got, I think we need to do more of. We need to take back this narrative that it's us versus them, and it's not. What we are simply asking for is, we want equal protection for everyone. We want justice for everyone. We want due process for everyone. And if you see a colleague who's doing something that is not right, we will back you up, because we want you to be members of our neighborhood, our community. We respect that your job is hard, and we want to make it easier and safer for you. So help us help you. So we saw quite a bit of that. And so what I would leave everyone with is a simple quote, and this is what it's about. All that is required for evil to thrive is for good men to do nothing. And all we're asking you to do is to do something. stand up, speak out, and we will have your back. Absolutely.
If
So.
you can't participate, if you want to, even buying a case of bottled water for the protesters, a delivery, is something that you can do to help them, right? Like it's a community thing, and clearly the governments have shown that they really don't care whether American citizens live or die. I think that's been made evident for decades. Right? The police force is so militarized and so infiltrated that they're really not looking out to protect working folks. They're basically protecting the status quo.
Yeah, well,
so it all comes down to, well, where do you turn? Well, we turn to one another, right? Because ultimately, and this was a thing that Bernie said in his speeches while he was still actively a candidate, that it's up to us. It's up to all of us to take care of one another. I will do something for today for someone I don't know, and that's what this entire movement is about. And based on the contributions that Bernie got and the number of volunteers that he had, I would say that that is the vast majority of Americans. And that's huge because if they're looking out for one another, right, and people unite because of this, then the police will have no choice but to stand down, right? Because quite honestly, they're outnumbered.
yeah.
You know?
I would hope that we get it together before then. And if you're serving in the military, I have a lot of friends who saw combat, women in combat, and I absolutely have utmost respect. Like I grew up under the diplomatic corps, so we were taught that that was the front line to protect our men and women in the military. That if we failed somehow, then we were risking the lives of our military. So I grew up with the utmost respect for that. So yeah, Andy, I think your message and everything that I was talking about also applies to our military men and women. So just because you're following orders is not an excuse. You can stand up and say no. You can become a conscientious objector. and I hope that if you are given orders like we saw the National Guard coming down the street in a suburban neighborhood in Minneapolis, firing upon people on their own patios, shooting at their homes, that if you see something like that, you will stop it. You will not be a part of that. Because when you fail, the rest of us fail. And we cannot allow that to happen. So, all right, now we have gone way over time. Andy, do you have any closing?
I have one quick thing to talk about. This is a little bit off topic, but it goes back to the 25th, the thing that basically kicked this all off. And this is a perspective of a trained medical professional in our local hospital who took it upon himself to go over all of the footage he could find on what I call the execution of George Floyd. And there's a lot, obviously, of emphasis on the one officer that had his knee on George's neck, and how he was the one responsible for killing him. Well, the interesting thing that this doctor had to say was everything that he'd been able to see, including all the different angles, and the one from behind that showed the three police holding him down. As far as he could tell, the man responsible for killing George Floyd was the middle police officer who had his knee on the man's chest. When you think about how your throat is structured, your trachea is here in the middle. When you apply pressure in this direction, you cut off someone's air. When you apply from the side, you're pushing against two sets of muscles that have the capability of holding a knee up off of your trachea. The guy's air didn't get cut off through his neck. it was compressed on his chest by the middle officer. This was this guy's idea, which now brings into question, did they arrest the right guy? And that makes it more important that all 4 officers get arrested and charged. Because now there's a question, who was responsible for his death?
Well, that's exactly right. And as a first responder, which they all are, and I've seen other police officers mention this, when you fail to render aid, when someone is in duress, you are culpable for that, right? So even if this is a interesting scenario, so the other 3 officers are also accessories because they failed to live up to their own pledge. They failed to deliver basic aid to somebody who was calling out, "I can't breathe." Right? So yeah, that's a interesting scenario, Andy. We've got Keith Ellis now as assigned as the special prosecutor, and I hope Mr. Ellis will act accordingly.
Keith Ellison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have my own reservations about some of his past work, but I hope he understands the gravity of doing the right thing and not necessarily the right thing based on what he's told to do. Because
That would be a very interesting report.
Right, because I cannot believe that Amy Klobuchar still serves in Congress today, based on what we know now.
Right. She's too busy, trying to play, look at me, I might be a VP.
I think that is officially over now. So, yeah. Okay, on that happy note, all right, so we will be back here Friday. Hopefully we have some more happy things to talk about by Friday, but we'll see how it goes. So one of the events that we have coming tonight, and this is super important, I know everybody's engaged in protests and things like this, but COVID is still a risk, and we're seeing way too many people out there without masks on. We're seeing too many photos and videos of police officers pulling people's masks down so that they can mace them. Not cool.
That's just killing the virus,
right? Yeah, with pepper spray. So this evening we are so proud and privileged to have Dr. Peck, who's an internal specialist medical doctor, and Dr. Burdett, who's a virologist working on the COVID issue. And what we try to do here is provide you with, number one, credible information that is accurate and you can, take to the bank. The other is an opportunity for you to ask questions. So we curated a list of common questions. Some are a little more outlandish than others, and provided those to the 2 doctors. But we want to invite our audience to participate in this event, and that's coming up at 8 p.m. Eastern this evening across all of our networks. So you will have access to get your questions submitted, and if you're one of our Patreon donors, you actually have, you should have already received the invitation to join as an audience member to the actual call. So you get front row center seating and priority Q&A with that. But please tune in this evening.
I've decided that I'm probably going to end up crashing this party, so in my own personal act of civil disobedience.
Excellent. We look forward to it. We will have the mace ready.
Excellent. Good. Because it clears the sinuses.
Right. Okay, on that note, everybody have a wonderful Wednesday. Please stay safe out there. One thing that came out is if you're going to a protest, do not wear contact lenses, because when they start tear gassing you, they melt. Wear your glasses. Okay. So
safety goggles.
Safety goggles is
proof safety goggles. Save your eyesight from rubber bullets.
Exactly. So, all right, stay safe, people. We'll see you on Friday.
Take care.
This is Progressive Insider.
Yeah. Progressive Insider, you know they wiser. This that new media company covering everything. I'm talking that news you ain't heard of.